Lately, I've been seeing a lot of social media trends for like underconsumption, simple living, intentional living, living mindfully. And that got me to thinking a little bit about boundaries and how boundaries play a huge role in the way that we live our life. Whether we don't have boundaries and we just kind of say yes to everything, or maybe we have these rigid boundaries and we don't really venture outside of our comfort zone. So, first, I want to talk about how boundaries are the framework for intentional living. We have to think about what intentional living is, right? It is living with intention. Duh. But what does that mean? It means setting your values, your priorities, and trying to align yourself the most with that. It's obviously never going to be perfect, and that's something I'll touch on later. But ultimately, you should be living a life that you enjoy, not what other people say you should enjoy or what you think should be happening. Essentially, intentional living is aligning your life with your values and your priorities. It is living with intention. I don't know about anybody else, but for me, if I don't set boundaries, my time, my energy, even my space gets slowly eaten up by everybody else's expectations, by a lack of planning, by just life. It's like by default, things just kind of go a little chaotic. And boundaries helps me a lot with that. I like to think of boundaries as filters for my life. So I get to let in what I want and I get to keep out the stuff that I don't want. And a lot of people like to think about boundaries as this really harsh and cruel thing, almost like a wall that I put up, but it does not have to be that way. Boundaries are not harsh, they're protective. Think about the way someone might care for a little kid. They say, you have to brush your teeth. That is to care for their teeth. That is a boundary. They say, you can't have screen time after 8 p.m. because we know if a kid has screen time after 8 p.m., they're going to be up all night. There are little rules that we set for children that are kind of boundaries, and we can apply the same thing to ourselves. So boundaries don't have to be cold or selfish or harsh. They're just protecting us, maybe from other people, and maybe even from ourselves. Boundaries are a form of self-respect and also relationship care. They really just clarify your wants, your needs, and your capacity. If you don't have the capacity to give, it wouldn't be fair to say that you do, because then you are going to disappoint someone else. It is less disappointing to hear no than to hear yes and then have that fall through. And setting these limits helps you to actually show up more in the areas that matter the most to you. So let's think about what your values are. For some people who value family, they're more family oriented, it wouldn't make sense for them to take a promotion that's going to make them move or take time away from the family. And while it may make sense to some people who value work a little bit more and that type of success, it's not going to make sense for the family person who wants to be there for their family. Or maybe they want to spend more time with their friends. It's not going to make sense for them to take on more at work. Now, on the flip side, if somebody is more like, okay, I really want to be the top of my career, I want to be the mogul, I want to be the CEO, living intentionally for them is not going to look like focusing on throwing their best friend's surprise birthday party. Yeah, they can show up. That's not to say they can't have relationships outside of work, but maybe taking on too much outside of work isn't going to work out the best. I don't want this to sound like one is better than the other. It's not. It's just about aligning yourself fully with what you want out of your life and setting those boundaries in a kind and consistent way. Another boundary that people don't talk about as much is how your environment reflects your boundaries. So if you are constantly surrounded by clutter, it probably means that you're bringing in too much stuff. It means that you have really lax boundaries, maybe with your budget, maybe with overspending, maybe with overconsumption. That is an indicator of boundaries. Now, if you just really love maximalism and you want to have a ton of stuff that really means a lot to you, that is a completely different thing. But I'm talking about the people who feel really, really overwhelmed with clutter. And I say that because I'm one of them. I don't love clutter. But there have been times in my life where I've looked around and I've been like, why do I have all of this stuff? Like, what am I doing with this? There are other things, little knickknacks, things like that I absolutely adore and I would not get rid of. Again, intentionality is about defining what has value and what doesn't. what do you prioritize versus what do you not prioritize. That's not to say every single thing in your closet has to spark joy, like Marie Kondo says, but ideally most of it should. Number 4 is that boundaries support sustainability. So sustainability goes in pretty well with intentionality and intentional living, although they are not synonymous. But for a lot of people, they do go hand in hand, so I'm going to talk about it a little bit. It's important to note that living sustainably is not just about what you buy, it's about how you consume what you already have, and it's about how you live. So the way that boundaries play a role in this is that boundaries protect you from these marketing loops, these ways that companies, social media, even comparison culture, just everything that leads you to overconsumption and burnout. If you're living intentionally and you're keeping in tune with your values and checking your list of things that make sense for you in your life, you're not going to fall victim to some of these sales and trends and things that don't really align with you. That might look like saying no to constant productivity. It might look like saying, hey, I can't go out tonight because honestly, I need a rest weekend. Another good thing to note is that boundaries are deeply personal. There's no right way to set a boundary. There are just things that make sense for you and where you're at in life. So your age is going to play a big role. When I was 20, I did not have the same boundaries that I do now at 27 years old. What you say yes or no to is going to shift over time, and it should, and that's okay. The point of all of this is being intentional, and I know I've said that a billion times, but it's about deciding and choosing instead of living more passively and just letting things happen. And just knowing, like, you don't have to be perfect at this. You just have to try and just see what works. It's like this kind of feedback loop. You get to see, okay, this did not go well. How can I tweak this and move forward? You don't need to be perfect at this. Boundaries are a practice. They're not the destination. You're not going to do it perfectly ever. You're going to find boundaries that work for you, and you're going to find boundaries that you're like, that might have been a little too harsh, or maybe I need to amp it up. Maybe I need to do a little bit more. And just like with budgeting, which is another form of a boundary, you're going to look and say, well, I actually need a little bit more wiggle room in groceries, and I spend way less money on clothing than I thought I did. Or, no, I need to put a little bit more in savings for my dog because he's silly and likes to injure himself, or whatever. The most important thing is that whenever you set a boundary, you stick to it and you're consistent. Not to say that it never changes, but if you say, hey, I'm going to spend less time on my phone, remember the why behind it. That's the most important thing, finding your why behind the boundary and then following through on that, because that why is your value. That's the real intention. So remember, these boundaries should be bringing you joy, not just setting limitations on your life. Make sure that you are setting boundaries that make you live a more fulfilling life. Living intentionally isn't about having these rigid rules. It's about living a life that feels good to be in. Thank you so much for being here, and if any part of this video resonated with you, I hope you stick around, and I would love to see you comment a boundary that you think you should set or something you didn't know was a boundary until today. For the most part, this channel is just going to be my way of rambling about things that I'm interested in. So today that was intentional living and boundaries. Yeah, I've got a lot of ideas, but if you've got any, drop them below. See you next time.